Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another presentation. I'm super excited because right now we have with us Dr. David Weiss, who is the president and CEO of the Weiss International Limited. He actually is a doctor, like I said, has a doctorate from University of Toronto, and also has three, not one, three master's degrees in education, psychology, and philosophy. He is specialized in leadership and executive coaching for Fortune 500 and social enterprise and public sector organizations. He's a certified coach with the International Coach Federation and also a certified life and wellness coach. And he is an affiliate faculty member teaching in the executive development programs of two universities, and he is also a director with the Institute of Corporate Board Directors. Previously, David was the VP and Chief Innovation Officer of a multinational consulting firm, and also an affiliate professor at the Rotman School of Management and a senior research fellow at Queen's University. Like I said, he has a PhD in psychology, and he actually has consulted more than 1,000 businesses and organizational projects on 5 continents, including Canada, in continents and countries, right? So among countries including Canada, USA, England, Holland, France, Italy, Israel, China, South Africa, Chile, and so many others. He also delivered over 220 conference presentations, 221 now, and presented at over 150 university executive development programs and wrote over 60 journals and 7 books, including the best-selling book, The Leadership Gap and Innovation Intelligence. So everyone, let's say welcome to Dr. David Weiss. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be part of this process.
Honor is all ours. So, Dr. Weiss, you are having a very beautiful program and process for our today's presentation, which is called C.L.E.A.R Coaching for People Leaders. So, what is C.L.E.A.R and what is People Leaders?
So let me get into this. I'm thinking about the role that you have as a coach, not only when you are coaching someone, but how you enable leaders within organizations to be able to be effective coaches. And that's a little bit different than, for example, when I coach someone, wherever they are in the world, I'm coaching someone and maybe I have an hour. But when you're doing leadership coaching, when leaders who are managers of employees, they don't have an hour and they don't meet every, so often in an organized way. It's more sporadic. It's sometimes, in the moment, and they're expected to coach effectively. And what I thought I'd do today is share some thoughts on what is the mechanisms and the methods that would work most effectively to be able to coach in that kind of scenario.
Awesome. And I can't wait to hear all of the details about it and learn from you.
So let's get into it. So I'll share some thoughts on this. So C.L.E.A.R Leadership Coaching. C.L.E.A.R actually is an acronym. It stands for 5 words. I'll walk you through them. It's context, listen, empathy, action, and respect throughout. And this is, again, I'm going to focus on how you might be a catalyst to enable people managers to be effective in their role as a coach within organizations. All of the information and the processes are also relevant to coaches who are coaching directly individuals themselves. So it'll be on both levels, but I'll focus today mostly on how to enable that people manager to be effective in that environment. So this is me. I've done a lot of stuff, and these are some of the books that I'll be leveraging in the work that I'll be sharing with you today. So the objectives are, why is coaching essential capability for people leaders, especially now we're coming out of a pandemic. Hopefully we're having a pandemic recovery. And then what are the essential techniques that are associated with C.L.E.A.R coaching? And I want to give you some techniques so that you can put them to use or share them with others. And then ultimately, I'm going to give you a roadmap to think about of how you actually go on this journey and help others go on this journey.
Amazing.
So let's take a look at this first one, which is, why is coaching an essential capability for people leaders during this challenging time? So the question is, why now? it's been there for a long time. Coaching has been an essential capability for people leaders for a long time, but we're faced with a different kind of environment. It's referred to as a VUCA world. VUCA is not a new term. It came about in the late 80s when there was tremendous political change in the world. But it's really been a word that's come to life now in much greater extent because of the pandemic. So VUCA is an acronym for 4 words, and the first word is volatile. And what's happening is that we're in a situation where the world is just much more violent. We're reading front page news of wars, where we're seeing so many other challenging situations going on. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. We're dealing with people not knowing what to do anymore. We don't have research. We don't have best practices on how to respond to a pandemic. We're dealing with situations that people in life don't know how to deal with. How do you live and work in a remote environment all the time? These things are new and challenging, certainly in the workplace and certainly for coaches everywhere. It's more complex, multiple parts, a lot of things moving all at the same time, and there's a great deal of ambiguity, meaning that there are multiple interest groups that have very different opinions, and ultimately they don't agree. So no matter what you do, you're going to dissatisfy someone. So I thought about this and I decided to flip it to the positive. And this is how it relates to the environment that a lot of our people leaders are working in right now. So the V becomes vision. What is in fact, not vision in 5 years from now where you're going to be, but more in terms of purpose. And we're finding people really want purpose, and organizations are searching for that kind of purpose, and leaders need to be able to share that purpose when they coach others. The U is understanding. It's no longer a world where people will work in an environment where they don't understand why they need to do things. And so there's a greater connectivity that's required between people leaders and with people that they're working with. Thirdly, there's curiosity. The C for VUCA, when I flip it to the positive, means that we really need to unleash all the ideas of people. We need to create psychological safety. We need to bring out those ideas so that people will participate in a different kind of way. And agility, and I'm not thinking about agile scrums and things like that. I'm thinking more in terms of a world where iteration becomes the pattern, where we don't know the answers, so we're going to need to experiment a great deal more. And we need a situation where people feel comfortable doing that. This kind of VUCA world, where it's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, flip to the positive of vision, understanding, curiosity, and agility, really necessitates a different kind of interaction between people leaders and the people that they are leading, where people are concerned, where maybe they're bringing up issues that, they're lost, they're confused, and you need to coach them, or where you are noticing things and you want to bring it up to chat with them. In both those scenarios, we really need much, much better and stronger coaching. So, and we see this. Gallup came out with research. Managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores. Look at that. Managers, the people managers, make the difference. 1 in 2 employees has left their job to get away from their manager at some point in their career. So if you have trust with your manager, if the manager is a great coach, you're going to retain people in this great attrition time. 48% of U.S. employees are actively job searching or watching for job opportunities. And now with LinkedIn and other methods where people are actually being approached without even asking for opportunities, people are saying, well, why not apply? And they may be getting opportunities, and that ultimately becomes another variable where we really need to build those relationships, and coaching is a really beautiful way to do it. And finally, it takes more than 20% pay raise to lure most employees away from a manager that they admire. In other words, if you're working for a manager you admire, if you're working with someone who really is a great coach as a manager, then I'm not going to leave. You're going to have to really pay me at least 20% more for me to go. So that's the proposition.
Absolutely. I was, some years ago, I actually read about a study where people were offered a better pay at a different company And they said that so the study was like, why do people stay at a certain job, and what are the different reasons? And actually, number one reason was not higher payment, but actually was the environment and the friendliness or bonding with the coworkers. So if like the environment where they worked in was nice and they felt good at it, even if somebody would offer them a better pay, they wouldn't leave because of the environment. So payment was like kind of like the lowest on that scale of reasons for people to pick a job or stay at a job.
Yeah, that the money is important. I
Yeah,
don't want to
absolutely.
discount it, but the
Yeah.
Corporate Leadership Council in Washington came out with research that said the number one non-monetary motivator, so in other words, other than money, motivator is working for a leader you admire. And that creates retention. So getting leaders to be admirable is extremely important. And one way to do that is in that interpersonal relationship through coaching. And so that's a lot
So
about what I want to share with you today, some techniques in how to do that.
yeah, and again, I have to ask this. So, are managers or do managers or leaders have to be coaches?
Well, they need to be able to coach their employees because they will
Yeah.
have opportunities as a group as well as individually to talk to individuals, and that will be extremely important. A lot of managers think that coaching is telling people what to do. And what I'm going to position coaching as in this C.L.E.A.R model that we use at Weiss International is essentially to understand the context, to really listen deeply rather than telling, to ultimately demonstrate your empathy and helping the person discover what's going on, and then guide them to action that they can own. It's an empowerment process and respect throughout. And that's what C.L.E.A.R is going to be about. And I want to give people some techniques on how to do that. So yes,
Excellent.
all managers really need to be coaches. They don't need to be coaches like expert coaches. They need to be coaches at the level where they're able to work with their employees in the moment when they need
Awesome. Thank you.
it. Okay, let's get into it.
Yes.
So so when I think about this, so here's where we left off. So the second objective then is, what are the essential techniques to be effective in C.L.E.A.R coaching? And I want to walk you through this. I'll give you a couple of broader ideas, and then what I'd like you to do is to work on specific technique. And throughout, please think about how you can apply this to your own situation. One of the important points in an organization is often when an employee feels that they have an issue, or a manager suggests to an employee that they have an issue, often the immediate response is that the issues are external to the employee. One of the key issues in C.L.E.A.R coaching, and in good coaching, no matter what the model is two primary principles. And number one is that the problems that people face at work are inseparable from who they are, the way they think, the way they act, and interact with others. And it has very much to do with themselves. It's a systemic view. It's not negating the external reality. The context is extremely important, but ultimately, what's their contribution? Who are they in this story that they ultimately are dealing? And their own thinking patterns and behaviors actually contribute to those outcomes. So the coaching process is a discovery process. And we need to get these people leaders to really understand that it's not about telling people what to do, but more about helping the individual self-discover what is their thinking pattern and their behaviors that might be important in a situation that they are currently facing. So, I'll give you two examples, and I like to think about organizational coaching as having two potential macro perspectives. One is the employee-initiated scenario. That means that an employee is coming to the manager and says, I'm worried about something, I'm concerned about something, and they initiate the conversation. The conversation may only be for 15 minutes, and it may be at the moment that the employee wants it. Scenario 2 is where the people leader actually initiates the conversation because they observed something, they thought of something, and they felt that they need to have a conversation with the employee. In both those situations, the C.L.E.A.R model is going to be effective, but but it is two different kinds of sources of what the issue is and what's being talked about. So for example, in the employee initiated situation, a manager gives a highly effective employee lots of positive feedback, redefines her role to better utilize her skills, make a more significant contribution to the group. And with the new job role comes a more senior title. And the manager explains to the employee that the enhanced role and title is recognition for terrific capabilities. So despite this, the employee is very anxious, and she's concerned about her new role, and so whether she will be able to continue to perform well in the new situation. So this is an employee who comes to the manager and says, I need to talk to you. I'm worried about whether or not how I'm going to do this. And the employee is initiating the request. It could be anything. It could be even personal. I'm facing a lot of stress at home at this particular time. There are many situations where employee initiates conversations where the manager needs to shift into a coaching mode immediately in that context. The second one is where a leader initiates it. And that's where you want to speak with an employee, for example, about the difficulty that, let's say, he is having with a colleague, and it appears that they're often in conflict, they're taking contrary opinions. So it's caused considerable tension, has made the employee and the manager uncomfortable on a regular basis at work, and you'd like to talk to the employee to consider how to better handle this situation. So in this situation, you would say, I need to have a conversation with you, and I need to tell you what I observe, that I'm observing that this conflict has been escalating between the two of you. Let's talk about it. So scenario 1 is quite different than scenario 2, not only in the storyline, but also in who generated the need for coaching at that particular moment. And what I'd like you to do as we go through this is, if you would think about a situation that might be employee initiated or leader initiated for you. And by virtue of thinking about that, maybe you'll be able to take some of these ideas and move it from theory into practice and make it a greater reality for you. So what is a coaching situation you want to think about in this workshop? So give that some thought, reflect on it. It's important as you think about it, where your mindset is going to be going, and then interpret and apply everything I'm sharing to that context, and you'll see it'll actually help your ability to absorb this information as well as put it to use afterwards. So let's get into it. The model is called C.L.E.A.R. Essentially, it's the first 5 letters, another acronym like the VUCA acronym. And it really does build on making sure people know their purpose, have understanding, ultimately can unleash their own curiosity and speak safely, and at the same time, experiment when they roll it out. So context is the C, the L is listen, E is empathy, A is action, and R is respect. And I'll tell you what I'd like to do. What I'd like to do is I'd like to actually do this on a whiteboard and bring it to life. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go to the back of the room. This is real. And I'm going to go to the back of the room, and I'll show you how this one plays out. So I'm going to close my screen for a second. And what I want to do is explain to you, by virtue of drawing it out on the whiteboard, the overview of how this C.L.E.A.R model works. And let me bring this up, and there it is. And if it goes blurry, I'll just fix it right away. So hi, everybody. I'm now in the back of the room. And so here we have the same kind of model you just saw a moment ago: context, listen, empathy, action, and respect throughout. And the way this works when you're in a people manager role, it's quite different than mine, because in reality, I would typically do an hour coaching session, maybe every week, maybe every 2 weeks. It would be more formalized in that sense, and we would do it virtually. And it has a certain kind of cadence. The issues are brought up by the individual. in almost all cases, it's not about my issues. It's they're initiating it, they're bringing forward, and I'm working with them to do a self-discovery process as a thinking partner, as someone to help them know what to do next. But it comes from them. Same thing applies with the people leader, but the difference is this is probably going to have to be in 15 minutes. And it's going to have to be in the moment when it's required, or maybe scheduled shortly after. So it's a very different kind of cadence, a very different kind of process. The first thing you need to realize is that everything within coaching happens within a context. No matter what kind of coaching situation you're in, there is a reality within which this individual who is seeking coaching is operating. I'm going to talk a few minutes later about psychological safety. So when you talk about psychological safety, I'll describe that a little bit more in a few moments. But the openness in the environment for people to express their curiosity, to ask why are we doing things, the more that exists, the better and the easier the coaching's going to be. So it's part of the context. But the major message, whether it's work-related or whether it is personal related, the key issue in context that I'd ask you to have your people managers really understand is context is subjective. Context is not something that is true. There is a fact about what occurred. We reorganized our organization. We implemented a major change. We have a pandemic. You're working remotely. We have a lot of things going on that are real and they're true. However, what's going on in this context is that each individual is going to interpret it, infer from it in their own way. And the coach needs to be able to be sensitive to the reality that their perception of the context is not the way the other person perceives it. And they need to kind of attune to that. They need to get out of their own mindset when they're listening. And this is not an easy thing for people managers who aren't really trained extensively in coaching to do. You know, experienced coaches know how to do that, but this is something that's very important to teach to the people who will be coaching. The second step is to listen. And of course you listen throughout, but the key point is to listen in the opening of the process. And what I want you to do is, as someone, for example, in our first case, she was worried about, she's initiating it, she's worried, can I do that job? She's anxious about it. I don't want you to go into the mode or teach them to go into the mode that, tell them what to do, or say, I did that as well, and this is what I did. This isn't what the coaching is about. It's about asking questions and listening and trying to really understand, what is the issue from the perspective of the person you're coaching. Even in the situation where you're initiating it, so that conflict situation that I described, in that kind of situation, I want you also to be able to say, this is what I observed. I noticed the conflict has been escalating. Tell me about it. What's going on? Don't go into a mode of saying, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? It's not a multiple choice test. Don't put them through that, because then all of a sudden you're defining the issue and you're defining the problem. Give them the observation and let them define it. The empathy, and of course you're going to be empathic throughout, but the empathy is the middle part of this process. And what we really need to do in the empathy part is make sure that we're not just listening. It's not, for those who know psychological coaching and counseling, Rogerian approach, where we just listen and we feed it back. It's much, much more. I want you to actually ask good questions that help the person go deeper. So you're asking, what does that mean to you? And they're adding another layer. Or discover patterns where you're actually able to say, how does this relate to something else? And by virtue of those discovery of patterns, what will occur is you'll start getting a deepening, and through your empathy, you'll be able to help them get there. And then finally, the action. And the key part of action is that, and leaders have big appetites. They want to be able to say, what's the 6-month plan? In coaching, it's all about small steps. It's about getting people unstuck. It's getting that person who's worried about can she do the job to be able to move, to get momentum, to start addressing it in a little bit more effective way. And we need respect throughout. And what I advise people and teach when I teach this C.L.E.A.R coaching model is I want you to ultimately demonstrate respect throughout by, number one, acknowledging the other person. So, I just want to let you know that I acknowledge the courage it takes for you to actually think about this and come forward and tell me that you're worried about it. That's terrific. And ultimately, that acknowledgement gives people a sense of empowerment. And then, if you do feel you must give suggestions, I want you to ask permission to actually give suggestions. So what you would do in this case is you would say something like, would it be okay if I offered an idea?
Mm-hmm.
And keep the empowerment with the person that you are coaching. One final point. This is kind of happening throughout, and this is happening throughout. So in my 15-minute coaching, it really is in the listening, in the open, in the middle, in the end over here. So I would put, I got 15 minutes. I'd like to see this done in 4 minutes. So I know the issue within 4 minutes. I'll spend 7 minutes on doing the deeper dive, trying to understand it, seeing the patterns, helping them through their expression, see it, not me suggesting it, but they ultimately through good questioning, and then figuring out what the next steps are. The last 4 minutes would be in this part over here. So ultimately, it becomes a 15-minute interaction and coaching experience that you might want to take. So feel free to, just do a screen print if this ultimately works for you. And let me come back to the desk over here and share with you now some techniques of how to do it. Think of this as we just went to the concert, to the musical, and we heard the overture at the beginning of it, which has a little snippets of all the very lovely pieces that you're going to hear, and ultimately you're able to do that. And now I'll go into deeper dives so you really can get the various points that I'm making. So, ready to go?
Absolutely. Bring it.
Okay, let's bring it on. So I'm going to go back to my slides over here. So remember this, just to let you know, the background is a beautiful picture that I took in the Caribbean. It was so clear that day that when I was thinking about it, I said, that's exactly what we want to get people to reach when you're coaching someone. I want them to get one step further in clarity. If they can be a little bit clearer, if they can deal with things, then ultimately we'll have some progress, and that's really what we're trying to do. So that's this C.L.E.A.R approach, and it's memorable in that way. Just keep it in your mind so you can track your cadence as you coach. And so this becomes a roadmap, and it's quite elaborate, and I want to take you through the various pieces of this roadmap in the next little while and give you some technique as we play this one out. So the first one is going to be context. So there's a few things there. Listening, there's a few things there. Empathy, well, I'll talk about what kinds of questions to help you go deeper, see patterns, find choices, the actions that are necessary. Remember small steps, and then respect throughout. Acknowledge the person, asking permission to help the person go from where they are right now to where they need to be. But again, it's guiding them, but it's they own it. Don't take the ownership away. This isn't you taking over their ownership for them, but you are enabling them so they feel empowered, and therefore they own it, which increases the probability they'll do it. And by the way, it'll increase the probability you'll be an admired leader if you do this, and people will really want to stay for you and not leave. So let's take a look at context. Everything happens in context. Whether it's virtual, whether like this little picture face to face, it's ultimately in a context. Everything we do is in a context. So I want to just give you some tips on this over here. So psychological safety, let's spend a moment on it. Psychological safety has been something that has been driven extensively over the last number of years. And the reason why it's related to what we're talking about is that when you have a psychologically safe environment where people feel free to speak up, where they can actually share ideas, you'll find that when it is safe to speak up, the individual who is being coached, if they're initiating the situation, it's a greater probability that they will come forward to seek your coaching earlier in the stage of the issue.
Mm-hmm.
While if it's not psychologically safe, the probability is the person will come much later because it's threatening. They'll be judged poorly. So therefore, it might be at a very severe stage. So that's a very important context. What's the psychological safety in your culture, in your environment, in your relationship with your group? And even in the other case where you're initiating as the people manager coach, if you're initiating it and it's psychologically safe, what you observe, this conflict going on or whatever, will be listened to. It might not be taken in a threatening kind of way. But if it's not psychologically safe, it will likely be experienced as judgment. And therefore, it'll be a much more challenging environment where there might be more defensiveness and therefore be a harder coaching environment. So know that context. The work dynamics are also crucial, and the personal story. Every individual has their own story, and that story is part of their context. Let's listen to Amy Edmondson. So Amy Edmondson wrote this wonderful book, The Fearless Organization, and a bestseller, and she ultimately is now kind of the leading voice for psychological safety. Here's a short clip of Amy Edmondson actually describing the danger of not having psychological safety. Have a listen.
A nurse on the night shift in a busy urban hospital notices that the dosage for a particular patient seems a bit high. Fleetingly, she considers calling the doctor at home to check the order. Just as fleetingly, she recalls his disparaging comments about her abilities last time she called him at home. All but certain the dose is in fact fine. The patient is, after all, on an experimental protocol which justifies the high dose. She heads for the cart, gets the med, and goes toward the patient's bed. Quite far from the urban hospital, a young pilot in a military training flight notices that his senior officer might have made a crucial misjudgment. He lets the moment go by. Far from both of those stories, a senior executive who has recently been hired by a very successful consumer products company to join the top management team has grave reservations about a planned takeover. New to the team, feeling like an outsider, everyone else is so enthusiastic about the plan, he doesn't say anything. These are 3 episodes of workplace silence when voice was necessary. Voice would have been helpful. Now, you may think, if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't do that. Or you may be aware, as I am, of just how often this happens in the modern workplace. So, I've been fascinated by this problem for a long time. Why does this happen? It's quite simple, actually. It turns out that no one wakes up in the morning and jumps out of bed because they can't wait to get to work today to look ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, or negative, right? No, on average, we'd prefer to look smart and helpful and, positive and helpful. So the good news about all this is that it's very easy to manage, right? Don't want to look ignorant? Don't ask questions. Don't want to look incompetent? Don't admit weakness or mistake. Don't want to look intrusive? Don't offer ideas. And if you don't want to look negative, by all means, don't criticize the status quo. Okay. Now, this strategy, the good news about this very successful strategy is that it works for self-protection. The psychologists call this impression management. And there's a great deal of evidence that we're quite good at it. We learn how to do this sometime in grade school. By the time we're working adults, it's all but second nature. Have you ever had a question and you look around and you don't ask it? No one else seems to be asking. Maybe you're supposed to know. You think, I'll figure it out later. Right? So why does this matter? It matters because every one of these moments, every time we withhold, we rob ourselves and our colleagues of small moments of learning. And we don't innovate. We don't come up with new ideas. We don't. We are so busy, unconsciously for the most part, managing impressions that we don't contribute to creating a better organization. The nurses don't call. The pilot doesn't speak up. The executive doesn't say anything. So the good news is that not every workplace is, in fact, this way. There are some workplaces where people absolutely wake up in the morning, if not eager, at least willing and ready to take the interpersonal risks of learning. I call these special workplaces ones that have psychological safety. Now, I'll define psychological safety as a belief that it's absolutely okay, in fact, it's expected, to speak up with concerns, with questions, with ideas, with mistakes.
And that is exactly what we said VUCA was when you flip it to the positive, where people feel safe to express themselves, talk that curiosity. And when you create the context of psychological safety at work, you're going to enable effective coaching by leaders where they can talk to people and bring it up and actually be very helpful. The experience of connection and being heard is powerful enough to charge admission. It's something where we can create that environment, and ultimately we can create a context that will make a difference. So let me move forward and say, okay, so what's some techniques in listening when you open it up? And so that's that upper right-hand part of what's happening. So in listening, you open it up and you have a conversation. Typically, a people manager would do a little bit of a moment of rapport building. They'd say, how you doing? Everything okay? But that doesn't generate coaching. You often need a phrase that is a phrase that signals you're getting into a more serious conversation where you want to talk. And I find that the phrase, what's on your mind, is just a terrific bridging phrase, an opening phrase that allows you to ultimately signal that you are now talking about something more meaningful. It's not just what's, just your mind, it's your mind. So what is your experience? It's not about me, it's about you. And I find that if you go, what's on your mind instead of what are you feeling, it ultimately is a safer opening, but it does help people transfer it. And then once you figure out what's on their mind, they speak to it, whether they're initiating or the manager is initiating. I'd still like you to move into, I've observed the conflict or whatever. Tell me what's happening over here, what's on your mind. Paraphrase it back. And part of the power in paraphrasing is not only offering back what you heard, but I'd actually ask you to check, did I get it right? Because what you'll do is you'll get a response that says, yeah, mostly you got it right. And then you say, well, tell me, what did I miss? And so you're getting the person again, even in the listening mode where you're setting up what is the situation that you want to chat about, you're getting them to take it a little bit deeper to start thinking about what they really want to talk about. And then the finale question is, how can I help? It's an extremely important question because it's not about what you think you should help, but it's really from the perspective of the other person, where do they want your help? And I'd like you to be able to, phrase it in that way and see what ends up happening. So it's a process technique that I'd ask you to consider. Remember that opening phrase is really important, and there are many of them. This one is just one example of it. But what would be something that would be different than a typical thing like, how are you doing, which people usually answer okay, to something that lets you know that we're talking about something different. It's extremely important to listen and attune. One of the hardest parts in coaching is to turn off your own internal voice that you're hearing, where you're hearing language that says, oh, I know what that's like, or I've been there before, and moving into the other person's space. As part of the International Coach Federation, there's a number of videos that they have, and this is going to be Sakina Gordon-Jones, talking about listening. And listen to what she says. It's a very insightful 2-minute clip on how deeply we want our coaches to listen.
Yeah. I think what shows up is their level of attunement to the client. One of the things we listen for as a mentor coach is how is the coach responding to what the client offers? How do the coach respond to what is shared, what is coming up? And, when it's done poorly, I'm really listening very tactically so that I can move on to the next thing, right? I'm listening so that I've listened and I can move you. Where when you're doing this really well, you're so present with your client that you are hearing nuances in what's being shared, right? You are making connections in what's coming out of their mouth and what's happening around you. So you're really listening to the system, not just to the words. You're listening to what their body is saying and maybe not saying. Right? You are picking up on things because of your attunement that may be different for the client. One of the new things in the updated competency is that the coach has to consider the client's context. That means listening really empathetically, listening from the client's perspective, not just yours as the coach, so that the experiences that are being shared you're not filtering them through your context, but actually empathetically listening to them through your client's context and helping your client to hear that.
I love the idea that she brings in the context, that she ultimately talks about it from this attunement perspective. You'll find that coaches sometimes slip themselves where they go into their own sort of perspective of things, but people managers do it frequently because they've been trained to give a response, to demonstrate their knowledge and their experience. And in the coaching scenario, the message is attuned to the other person. Your experience is useful. It's not as if it's not useful, but I'd like that person to be able to say, I've gone through similar experiences, but tell me what it was for you, instead of let me tell you what it was for me, and you should do what I did, which is much less effective and often ineffective coaching. So what's on your mind is a great question as an opening. And it could be that you heard what's on their mind and you feel like there may be more, so you might ask, and what else?
Yeah.
Which, maybe there's another thing on their mind. And then what's the top issue for you? And then close with how can I help? Of course, paraphrasing in the middle. So let's go further and get some technique on empathy. So now imagine we're in a context, we know what we did the C.L.E.A.R, we're doing the listen, we're ultimately really attuning to the person, we know what the issue is. Took us just about 4 minutes because I only got 15 minutes in my coaching environment as a people manager. Now I want to demonstrate that empathy to help the person go deeper. So let me give you some technique and some questions. Empathy is the most important leadership skill, and they definitely need to demonstrate empathy, really getting into the other person's perspective, and rather than thinking their reality defines everything that other people should be going through. So this is that section, this box with the 4 kind of sticky notes under empathy. So this one right here that we're looking at on the roadmap. So empathy, I'm going to drive the notion of what questions to help you go deeper, to see patterns, and to find choices in that 7-minute middle section. And here are some questions that I'd ask you to think about when, good coaches actually have in front of them, on their mind, a great menu of questions that they can easily go to in the moment. And the more questions you have, the more effective you're likely to be as a coach. We need to get our people managers to at least have some level of questions, of options in their mind, because they won't really ask those questions without thinking about it in advance. So we talked about what's on your mind and what else. It's very, very helpful. The third one, what does X mean to you, is extremely important. It's a way to go deeper. So if someone says something like a feeling word, I'm really worried about that. Your question could simply be, what does worried about that mean to you?
Yeah.
And by virtue of asking that question, just imagine we the person usually will respond, and they're now going a level deeper. And that's what I mean by going deeper. It may be articulating something they thought of already, or it might be putting into words something that they really never said before, and by virtue of hearing themselves, they get some insights from going deeper. It could be a metaphor. Like, for example, a coachee, this is a real situation. It's like I'm trying to swim when a big wave knocks me over and I can't see anything.
Yeah.
Now, there's like, the person wasn't swimming. The person didn't have their vision really blocked. They weren't knocked over, but they used a metaphor. They used an image that ultimately captured it for them. When anyone does that, and you'll find that people are using metaphor very, very frequently, it's an opportunity to say, what does X mean to you? What does I can't see anything mean to you? And then the person said, well, what I mean is, I really can't see my way out of this, right? It's an image. It's meant to be kind of something that's a reality for the person, a story they're creating in their mind that's associated with what they're asking. And that's a great way to go deeper. So what does I can't see anything mean to you? Or what might be a situation like this one, a way to try to connect patterns? Or what would help you be able to see? That's a way of finding choices, the third kind of way of doing it. And they'd say, well, or what would have had to happen for you to be able to see in this situation? And then the person would say, well, it would have been really helpful to me to have this. And that will be something that will enable them to start considering, this is what I need, and this might be the small step I need to take. Reframing is a great one. Marshall Goldsmith, #1 coach in the world, did a reframe of the word feedback, which is commonly used in a lot of organizations, where a manager gives feedback, and reframed it as feed forward. So give feedback with a momentum towards doing something into the future. And you can do that as well by helping the individual reframe things. And what if you'd consider, the person says, I'm impulsive, that what's the part of that you appreciate? And I'm impulsive becomes I'm spontaneous. Or reframe, the person says, I got some really bad habits, and what's the positive of that? And I have coping mechanisms. Or I can't handle it. And how do you reframe that? And the person might come up with, I don't know how to make it any better. And all these become opportunities for you to work with the person to help them go deeper, to think about things, to experience their own power, their own strength, and therefore, in an appreciative kind of way, have them start discovering what they might want to do about this. And thirdly, the word should. Whenever you hear the word should, it's an important kind of message, because if you think about the word, I should exercise more, let's take a simple phrase, it's saying that someone other than me is telling me that I should exercise more. It's not like I own it, but I should exercise more. My doctor thinks I should exercise more. My family members think I should exercise more. Okay, I should exercise more. So it's interesting if people write it down and then they say, what would it be like if instead of the word should, you put the word could in there? I could exercise more. And what you're doing is you're moving more towards personal ownership. Or in fact, what if the person said, I can exercise more? Where you're transferring the ownership, where the person becomes the source, becomes empowered to make something happen. Which leads us to the action, our finale. And a lot of leaders struggle with getting people to move when they're not telling them what to do. So how do I ask those kinds of questions that get that to occur? And this one's really driven around small steps. The message is, it's like in the pandemic, where people were in their house, maybe sitting on the couch, lying on the couch, and someone would say, I want to go for a walk, I want to go outside, and that didn't work. They say, no, I want to just stay on the couch. And then you just said instead, can you just stand up? and the person says, all right, I could stand up. So the person stands up. And then you broke the log jam, and now they're standing, and all of a sudden say, okay, I'll go to the fridge. Okay, maybe I'll go for a walk. We need to get people unstuck, and that's the power of small steps. So, and it's all about getting the other individual to be empowered, and then you finish the action step with, so what was your takeaways? Because what they believe they got out of that coaching discussion may not be the same as what you think they got. So ask them what their takeaways. And I do that, by the way, in my coaching as well. Whenever I'm coaching an individual, I reserve the last 5 minutes of an hour coaching session and say, so what are your takeaways from today? And invariably the person says things, and it's fascinating, because, I would have thought they would have said something else possibly, but it's what they own and what they say. And maybe there's more discussion that we can have around those takeaways to kind of really understand what are they learning or getting or thinking of doing as their small steps going forward. It's a little bit like this, you get one little domino that actually moves, and it can actually create momentum. Have a look at this illustration of what it really means to actually take a small step, that small little domino.
Everybody knows about playing with dominoes, but what you may not know is that a domino can knock over another domino, which is about 1.5 times larger. So what I have here is a chain of dominoes. Each one is 1.5 times larger than the previous one. And the smallest domino is about 5 millimeters high and 1 millimeter thick. And I will carefully place it. And there are 13 dominoes, and the largest domino, it weighs about 100 pounds and is more than 1 meter tall. Ready? Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
That's the power of small steps. One little domino, and ultimately it creates another one. Looks a little like this too. If you look at the left-hand side, a lot of small steps. You can maybe reach the top. If you create too big of a step, it's out of my reach. I'll never do it. And I won't even get to the first one.
Would this mean also that if people are making too big of a change, then that would not be sustainable? Or is it impossible for people to have too big of a change?
So there's no impossible, there's no, truth where one thing works. It's all about probabilities. And the probability is, for most people, small steps will be something they'd be willing to do and actually act upon, while something that is so big, the probability is they might feel overwhelmed, I'm not ready, I can't do it. So it has a lower likelihood of success. But it doesn't mean that in one situation it might really work brilliantly and catapult someone to a much higher level. But what's your default? What's your opening play in the action step? And I strongly recommend that we talk small steps. I do it in my own coaching, where I would say, what's a small step that you might do? Who might be able to support you in making that step? By when might you be willing to do that? And ultimately, people are able to articulate a small step. They often are not as easily able to articulate, where do I want to be 6 months from now, or what's that leap that I need to take? And that ultimately blocks them because they feel overwhelmed by it.
And being a small or a big step is really depending on each person, I guess, right? Like,
Absolutely.
What is big for one is more for the other, and the other way around.
Right. So what I would do is I would, ask questions like this. So what's most important to you? And the person would articulate it. What becomes possible for you? What's holding you back? That you may want to have a small step to change that. What can I do to help? Or who else might be able to help? In an organization where you're a people manager, I'm offering my help already, but maybe there's someone else that you can chat with as well, and maybe personally or maybe at work. And what's a small step that you can take now, and then finish up with what are your takeaways from this discussion? And what you'll find is that people feel much more empowered. They feel empowered to take action. Your role as a coach is not to take over for the other person. It's actually to enable the other person to own it so that they feel empowered to take that action. So, and it's really important to show and demonstrate respect throughout. And what I mean by that, it's that bottom right-hand side, this section here. You should be acknowledging the person. And it's not that, it's not that common that people do this, but it makes a massive difference. Phrases like, be brief when you do that. I'm very active on LinkedIn and I post daily. This is one of the posts from conscious.is. And I'm honored to have so many followers. Be brief, be specific, be inarguable. So don't, say you did the best job ever. Be real about it. I really appreciate that you're willing to discuss the conflict you're having with that other person, and be sincere. Really, lean into it. And ultimately, by virtue of doing that, you'll be saying things like, I want to acknowledge you for your effort, your thoughtfulness. I admire your intentions. I want to acknowledge your commitment. I see how much you care, how important this is to you. These things people often would say after you do that. They'd say, thank you. I really appreciate that. And there's a connection. There's a trust that starts getting built, that you'll be able to help them more. And you would do this throughout, whether it's in the early stage, in the context listening stage, or in the empathy, or in the action. You do it throughout. And you ask permission throughout. What I mean by that is I want you to be able to ask permission by virtue of saying, would it be okay if I suggested something? Now, certainly when the employee is initiating things, you really should ask permission, because in most cases I'll say, of course. But what you've done by doing that instead of just suggesting is they own the receiving of that suggestion. And therefore you haven't taken over the ownership by your suggestion. And people managers, remember, have power. So if they have power, if they make a suggestion and it's too strong, someone might, especially if the psychological safety is not that great, might feel like you're telling me I should do something. And therefore I have no choice. Yeah. So ask permission instead. And, acknowledge and appreciate the person's inherent value. Ask permission to suggest ideas. And ultimately that could make a massive difference. So the third objective we said was, how can you apply this to your work settings, to your coaching practice if you are a coach, to how you work with people managers to coach them to be coaches? So what I'd really suggest is it's doable. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. You are the master of your destiny. You can influence, direct, and control your own environment. You can make your life what you want it to be. I want to empower the coaches to be able to work with the people managers to be effective. And this roadmap, which you could just do a screen print of, really makes a powerful difference that you would be able to kind of like track it. This almost becomes a summary of the entire presentation on one page for you to be able to remember what are some of the key techniques that hopefully you'll be able to apply. So the context, the listening, the empathy, the action, and respect throughout. And to help people go from where they are now to be empowered to that future reality with some more clarity and find that lovely road and that pathway to get there. So think about what are the do's, what are the don'ts, what do you want to avoid, don't go into a mode of thinking about your own situation and, how it applies. You can tell them what you've done. Don't do multiple choice questions or answers. Actually attune to them and deeply listen to them. Follow that, understand context is actually very subjective. Understand that listening is really to draw it out from them and how can you help. Empathy is very much about helping them go deeper, helping them see patterns. Action is about small steps. And the respect throughout is to acknowledge them, ask permission to suggest, and help them get some meaningful takeaways. So think about, what you can do, by when, help them think that through. let me just close with this lovely little poem. And people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played and learned new ways of being and stopped and listened deeper. Someone meditated, someone prayed, someone danced, someone met their shadow, and people began to think differently, and people healed. And in the absence of people who lived in ignorant ways, dangerous, meaningless, and heartless, even the earth began to heal. And when the danger ended and people found each other and grieved for the dead people, and they made new choices and dreamed of new visions and created new ways of life and healed the earth completely, just as they were healed themselves. Now, this is so poignant.
Beautiful.
As we're coming out of the pandemic. Hopefully we're coming out of the pandemic. But just let me let you know that this was Kathleen O'Meara's poem, And People Stayed Home, written in 1869.
Wow.
After the famine. We've gone through this before. This has been a really hard time for everybody. We really need to support each other in every environment we're in. And we can do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been such a rich presentation and so much information that has been delivered. And thank you so much for making the time and taking the time to share your knowledge and expertise with us. And I like that you put the next slide there, but of course I'm going to ask you as well. Where can people get in touch with you, and how can they learn more from you and what you do?
Well, my firm is called Weiss International, and the firm, you have the website on the bottom, www.weissinternational.ca. There also is on that website the fifth tab, one that says free articles. So I learned a long time ago that anything I've written, over 2 years ago has no value unless I give it away for free. So you have about 40 different articles, some in English, some in French.
Yeah.
And it's available, free downloads. Just click on as many as you want and you can download it. The books, I have one chapter from each book as a free download. And of course, you can buy the various books if you wish, on innovation, on leadership, on human resources, how to work with people. Follow me on LinkedIn at Weiss at weissinternational.ca. I've got currently 24,000 followers and 16,000 connections. It's a real honor to be connecting daily with people because I put up daily posts. And if you feel that there's a need for coaching, we have a whole team of people who have lived experiences and know how to understand the situation and yet attune to the other person. So we have a very active practice in this space, and it's worldwide, in Canada, in the States, in Europe. I have some people in Asia who I'm coaching, and we have a very broad offering in that space, and we're really proud of our team and what we contribute to organizations to help them be effective. So Thank you again, everybody. It's been a pleasure sharing these ideas, and all the best to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And everyone, you know where to find David. So go check out the website, check out the LinkedIn, connect there, and you have so much to learn. You have so much to assimilate from Dr. David Weiss's knowledge and expertise in the field. So we'll now take a quick break. Again, Dr. David, thank you so much for your presentation. Everyone will take a quick break, and we'll see you after the break for the next presentation, or we'll see you tomorrow for another set of presentations.
Bye-bye, everybody.